Ambassador Vithras of the Korathi Dominion had attended 1047 sessions of the Galactic Assembly. She had watched empires rise and fall from her seat in the Great Circular Chamber. She had voted on treaties that shaped the destiny of billions. She had seen species join the assembly with great celebration and watched others fade into extinction with quiet sorrow. But in all those centuries, one thing had never changed. The empty seat. It sat in the third ring, between the Velith merchants and the Droma collective, a simple chair made of polished metal and soft fabric, no different from any other seat in the chamber. Above it, a small holographic display showed a blue and green planet spinning slowly in the darkness of space, Earth, humanity's world. The seat had been empty for 300 years. Vithras remembered the day that assembly had voted to extend the invitation. She had been young then, barely a century old. Watching from the observer gallery as the senior ambassadors debated the matter, humanity had just discovered faster-than-light travel. Their first clumsy ships had stumbled into Velith trading routes, causing confusion and excitement in equal measure. The vote had passed with overwhelming support. A new species, a young civilization ready to take its place among the stars. The assembly had prepared a grand welcome. They had sent their finest diplomats to Earth, carrying the formal invitation written on ceremonial parchment made from plants, grown on 100 different worlds. The humans had received the diplomats politely. They had listened to the invitation with what seemed like genuine interest. They had asked thoughtful questions about the assembly, its history, its purpose, its rules, and then they had done nothing. No delegation arrived at the assembly. No application was submitted. No further communication came. The diplomats who had delivered the invitation returned with confused expressions, unable to explain what had happened. That humans had seemed friendly enough. They had not rejected the invitation outright. They had simply not responded to it. Years passed, then decades, then centuries. Occasionally, the assembly would send another delegation to Earth, asking if perhaps the invitation had been lost, or if humanity needed assistance with the application process. Each time, the humans smiled and nodded and promised to consider the matter carefully. The seat remained empty. At first, the assembly had treated this as a minor curiosity. Young species sometimes needed time to adjust to the idea of galactic civilization. Perhaps humans were simply not ready for such a big step. The assembly was patient. They could wait. But 300 years was a long time, even for species that measured their lives in millennia. Vithras tapped her claws against her desk as the current session droned on. Some trade dispute between the Korathi mining guilds and the Velith transport unions. She had heard variations of this same argument for the past 50 years. Her attention kept drifting to the empty seat. It bothered her. It had always bothered her, though she had never spoken about it openly. The empty seat felt like an insult, though she could not explain exactly why. The assembly had extended its hand in friendship, and humanity had simply ignored them. What kind of species did that? When the trade discussion finally ended, Vithras raised her hand to request speaking time. The assembly speaker, a massive droma with skin like cracked stone, acknowledged her with a rumbling voice. The chair recognizes Ambassador Vithras of the Korathi Dominion. Vithras stood, her scales catching the light from the artificial sun that hung at the center of the chamber. Honored colleagues, I wish to raise a matter that has been overlooked for far too long. I speak of the empty seat. A murmur ran through the chamber. Many ambassadors turned to look at the chair marked with Earth's hologram. For 300 standard years, we have maintained this seat for a species that has shown no interest in occupying it. We have sent delegation after delegation, invitation after invitation. Each time, humanity has responded with vague promises and empty courtesy. I propose that we formally rescind the invitation and allocate this seat to a species that actually desires membership in our assembly. The murmurs grew louder. Ambassador Thalos of the Velith merchants rose to respond. With respect to my Korathi colleague, perhaps humanity simply needs more time. 3 centuries is not so long. The Droma took 400 years to accept their invitation, and they are now among our most valued members. The Droma speaker made a sound like grinding rocks, which Vithras knew was their version of laughter. This is true. We are a patient people. Perhaps humans are merely slow, as we were. Slow. Vithras shook her head. That humans have had 300 years to submit a simple application. A child could complete the process in a single afternoon. No, this is not slowness. This is either incompetence or deliberate disrespect. Either way, the seat serves no purpose sitting empty. Ambassador Yenith of the Hollow Star Confederacy spoke up. Her voice was like wind through crystal chimes. Perhaps we should send one final delegation. Give humanity a clear deadline. If they do not respond within a reasonable time, then we rescind the invitation. This suggestion found broad support. The assembly voted quickly, as they often did on matters they considered unimportant. A delegation would be sent to Earth. Humanity would be given 1 standard year to submit their membership application. If they failed to do so, the invitation would be withdrawn permanently. Vithras volunteered to lead the delegation. She told herself it was because she wanted to see this matter resolved after 3 centuries of uncertainty. But privately, she admitted to a deeper curiosity. She wanted to understand these strange humans, who had ignored the greatest honor the galaxy could offer. The journey to Earth took 3 weeks. Vithras spent most of that time reviewing the Assembly's files on humanity. There was surprisingly little information. Humans were carbon-based bipeds, similar in basic structure to many species across the galaxy. Their homeworld was slightly larger than average, with higher gravity and a thicker atmosphere. They had developed technology at a reasonable pace. Nothing exceptional, but nothing embarrassingly slow either. What struck Vithras as strange was the lack of detail about what humanity had been doing for the past 3 centuries. There were records of human ships traveling through assembly space, conducting trade with various species, but the records were fragmentary, incomplete. Humans appeared and disappeared without pattern or explanation. She mentioned this to her aide, a young Korathi named Keith, as their ship approached the Sol system. Perhaps their record-keeping is simply poor, Ketho suggested. Primitive species often struggle with administrative matters. Vithras was not convinced. Her instincts, honed by a millennium of diplomatic experience, told her something was not quite right, but she could not identify what. Earth itself was beautiful. Vithras had to admit that much. Blue oceans, green continents, swirling white clouds. It looked like a jewel hanging in the darkness, catching the light of its yellow sun. As their ship descended through the atmosphere, she saw cities stretching along coastlines, towers of glass and steel reaching toward the sky. The humans had clearly advanced since first contact. Their cities were larger, more sophisticated. Their orbital stations formed a ring around the planet, handling traffic from dozens of ships arriving and departing at any given moment. That gave Vithras pause. Dozens of ships. Where were all these ships going? And where were they coming from? A human voice came through their communication system. Assembly vessel, you are cleared for landing at Geneva Spaceport. Welcome to Earth. A greeting party will meet you at the terminal. The greeting party turned out to be a small group of humans in formal clothing, led by a woman with gray hair and a warm smile. She introduced herself as Director Chen of the Diplomatic Relations Office. Ambassador Vithras, we're honored by your visit. It's been, 60 years since the last assembly delegation? I was just a junior aide back then. Time flies, as we humans like to say. Vithras studied the woman carefully. Chen seemed genuinely pleased to see them, with none of the nervousness or hostility that might indicate deception. If anything, she seemed slightly amused, as though she knew a joke that Vithras did not. Director Chen, I have been sent by the Galactic Assembly to discuss the matter of humanity's membership. As you know, the invitation was extended 300 years ago. We are concerned that no formal response has been received. Chen nodded, still smiling. Yes, of course. The invitation. Very kind of the Assembly to think of us. Please, let me show you to your accommodations. You must be tired from the journey. We can discuss everything tomorrow, after you've had a chance to rest. Something in her tone made Vithras uneasy. The words were perfectly polite, but there was an undercurrent she could not quite identify. It almost sounded like Chen considered the Assembly's concerns to be somehow quaint. That night, Vithras could not sleep. She stood at the window of her guest quarters, looking out at the lights of the human city below. It reminded her of Korathi Prime in some ways. The same bustle of activity, the same sense of life and energy pulsing through every street. But something was different, something she could not name. She accessed the Assembly's database through her personal terminal, searching for any information about human activity in the galaxy. The records were scattered, hard to piece together, but as she searched, patterns began. Morning came slowly on Earth. The sun rose over the mountains to the east, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Vithras watched it from her window, having given up on sleep hours ago. Her mind was too full of questions, too troubled by the patterns she had discovered in the Assembly's forgotten records. When Director Chen arrived at her quarters, Vithras did not waste time with pleasantries. I need to understand what humanity has been doing for the past 3 centuries. Chun's smile did not waver. Good morning to you too, Ambassador. Did you sleep well? No, I spent the night reading reports. Hundreds of reports, scattered across every sector of known space. Humans appearing where they should not be, solving problems they were never asked to solve, and then disappearing before anyone thinks to question their presence. What is happening? Chen walked to the window and stood beside Vithras, looking out at the city below. Would you like some coffee? It's a human drink, quite stimulating, to help soothe those long sleepless nights. I would like answers. Yes. Chen nodded slowly. I imagine you would, and you deserve them, Ambassador. You've come a long way, and you've clearly done your homework. That's more than most assembly delegations bother to do. She turned to face Vithras directly. Walk with me. I want to show you something. They left the guest quarters and walked through the streets of the human city. The morning crowds flowed around them, humans of all ages going about their daily lives. Vithras noticed that some of them glanced at her with curiosity, but none seemed afraid or hostile. They simply accepted her presence and continued on their way. 300 years ago, Chen said as they walked, humanity received the Assembly's invitation. It was a wonderful gesture, truly. The idea that we might take our place among the stars, join a community of civilizations that had been traveling between worlds for thousands of years. It was humbling. Then, why did you not respond? We did respond, just not in the way the assembly expected. Chen led her into a small park, where children were playing on strange climbing structures while their parents watched from nearby benches. Tell me, Ambassador, what do you know about the assembly's decision-making process? Vithras frowned at the change of subject. It is thorough, careful. Every major decision requires study, debate, and consensus among all member species. And how long does a typical decision take? A major one, involving multiple species and significant resources. That depends on the complexity. A simple trade agreement might take only a few years. Something more significant, like a coordinated response to a natural disaster, could take decades. Chen nodded. Decades. That's what we discovered too when we started paying attention. The assembly is ancient, and in many ways admirable, but it moves slowly. Very, very slowly. They sat on a bench at the edge of the park. A child ran past, chasing a ball that had escaped from the playground. Chen smiled at the sight, then continued. When we received the invitation, our leaders studied the assembly carefully. They learned about its history, its structure, its accomplishments, and they learned about its failures. Do you know what they found? Vethris said nothing. She already suspected she would not like the answer. They found that the assembly had allowed 17 civilizations to collapse while committees debated whether intervention was appropriate. They found that trade disputes dragged on for centuries, destroying economies while diplomats argued over procedure. They found that piracy flourished in sectors where the assembly could not agree on who should bear the cost of patrols. The assembly is not perfect, Vithras admitted. No institution is, but it has maintained peace among hundreds of species for millennia. Peace, yes, but at what cost? Chen leaned forward. Humanity had a choice to make. Ambassador, we could join the assembly, take our seat at the table, and spend the next 1,000 years learning to navigate your bureaucracy. We could submit proposals and wait decades for votes that might never come. We could become one voice among hundreds, easily ignored, easily overruled, or we could simply start helping people. The words hung in the morning air. Vithras stared at the human woman, trying to understand what she was hearing. Helping people, she repeated. Exactly. No applications. No votes. No waiting for permission. When we saw a problem, we fixed it. When we saw people suffering, we helped them. It was really quite simple. You cannot just operate throughout the galaxy without authorization. There are protocols, treaties, jurisdictions. Chen laughed. It was a warm sound, without mockery. Ambassador, we learned very quickly that the galaxy is a big place. Most of it is empty. Most of the species out there are too busy with their own problems to pay attention to what a few human ships might be doing in some remote sector. And frankly, most of them were grateful for the help. She stood and gestured for Vithras to follow. They left the park and walked down a busy street, past shops and restaurants and offices. Humans moved around them, going about their lives. Let me give you an example, Chen said. 40 years ago, a plague broke out on Vareth Prime. Nasty thing, killed quickly and spread faster. The Vareth government contacted the assembly, requesting emergency medical assistance. Vithras remembered that incident, though only vaguely. Medical crises happened all the time. The assembly dispatched a response team. Yes, they did. 8 months later. By then, 3 million Vareth had died, and the plague had spread to 2 neighboring systems. Chen stopped walking and faced Vithras directly. Our ships arrived within 3 weeks. We had been monitoring the situation, and we had a medical team ready to deploy. We worked with local authorities to contain the outbreak, treated the infected, developed a vaccine. By the time the assembly's response team arrived, the crisis was over. That is, I did not know. Of course you didn't. We didn't announce ourselves. We didn't ask for credit or recognition. We just helped, and then we left. The Vareth government knows what we did. They've been our friends ever since. But the assembly never asked, so the assembly never knew. Vithras felt her understanding of the galaxy shifting beneath her feet. How many times has this happened? Hundreds, maybe thousands. We stopped counting long ago. Chen smiled again, but this time there was something harder behind it. Pirate fleets broken up before they could raid shipping lanes. Trade disputes mediated before they could escalate into conflicts. Natural disasters responded to before the death toll could climb too high. We've been busy, Ambassador. Very busy. But why keep it secret? Why not tell the assembly what you were doing? It was never secret. We just never announced it. There's a difference. Chen started walking again, leading Vithras toward a tall building at the center of the city. We learned early on that the assembly doesn't respond well to being bypassed. If we had tried to coordinate with your bureaucracy, we would have been tied up in procedures and protests for decades. So we simply didn't ask permission. The seat, Vethris said slowly. The empty seat in the assembly. It was a message. Clever of you to figure that out. Most assembly delegations never do. Chen nodded. The empty seat was our way of saying that we appreciated the invitation, but we had other priorities. We were too busy actually helping people to sit through endless committee meetings. They entered the tall building. Inside, Vethris saw humans working at screens and terminals, coordinating something that she could not quite understand. Maps of the galaxy covered the walls, with colored markers indicating she was not sure what. "Welcome to the Coordination Center," Chen said. "This is where we manage our operations across the galaxy. 37 active medical missions, 14 peacekeeping deployments, 22 trade facilitation officers, and those are just the official programs." Vithris stared at the maps. The scope of what she was seeing was staggering. Humanity had built an entire shadow network across the galaxy, operating alongside the assembly without ever interacting with it. "How is this possible? You cannot have the resources for all this. We don't do it alone." That's the other thing the assembly never understood. Chen walked to one of the screens and brought up a new display. It showed a complex web of connections between dozens of species, most of which Vithris did not recognize. "We call it the Cooperative. 53 species, none of them assembly members, all working together on an informal basis. We help each other. We share resources. We solve problems." "A parallel government," Vithris whispered. "Not a government. We have no laws, no taxes, no territory. Just a network of friends who trust each other." Chen turned back to face her. "The assembly invited humanity to join a club. We decided to start our own, and somehow, over 3 centuries, our club grew larger than anyone expected." Vithris stood in silence, trying to process everything she had learned. The empty seat was not a sign of human indifference. It was a declaration of independence. Humanity had looked at the Galactic Assembly, decided it was not good enough, and built something better. "Why are you telling me this?" she finally asked. "Why reveal all of this now?" Chun's expression grew serious. "Because something is coming, Ambassador, something that will threaten both the Assembly and the Cooperative. We've been watching the Vreeth hegemony for years. They're expanding aggressively and they don't care who gets hurt in the process. 3 of your border colonies are directly in their path. The Assembly is aware of the Vreeth threat. We are discussing our options." Vithris spent 3 more days on Earth, and each day brought new revelations. Director Chen arranged tours of facilities across the planet. Vithris visited training centers where humans learned the languages and customs of dozens of species. She watched medical teams preparing for deployment to a remote colony suffering from a water contamination crisis. She sat in on planning meetings where coordinators discussed trade route improvements that would benefit species the Assembly had never even heard of. The scale of it was overwhelming. Humanity had built something remarkable, something that made the Galactic Assembly look slow and bureaucratic by comparison, and they had done it without asking anyone for permission. On her final day before departure, Chen took her to a facility in the mountains. The air was cold and thin, and snow covered the peaks above them. The building itself was modest, a simple structure of stone and glass that blended into the landscape. "This is where it started," Chen explained as they walked inside. 300 years ago, after we received the Assembly's invitation, a small group of humans gathered here to discuss our options. They were scientists, diplomats, philosophers. They wanted to understand what joining the Assembly would really mean. The interior of the building was a museum of sorts. Old photographs lined the walls, showing humans from an earlier era. Documents in glass cases described the debates and decisions that had shaped humanity's approach to the galaxy. "They studied the Assembly for years," Chen continued. "They read every treaty, every resolution, every recorded debate, and the more they learned, the more concerned they became." Vithris stopped in front of a photograph. It showed a young human woman standing before a group of people, apparently giving a speech. Her expression was determined, almost fierce. "That was Dr. Sarah Okonkwo," Chen said. "She was the one who first proposed what she called the third path. Not isolation from the galaxy, not submission to the Assembly's bureaucracy, but something else entirely. Direct action. Helping people without waiting for permission. She sounds like a remarkable person. She died 160 years ago, but her ideas live on. Everyone who works for the Cooperative knows her name." Chen led Vithris to a window overlooking a valley below. The first mission was small. A mining colony on a moon in the outer reach had suffered a caving. Thousands of workers were trapped underground. They had sent a request to the Assembly for rescue assistance. "I do not remember such a request. You wouldn't," was still pending in committee when our ships arrived. We had been monitoring Assembly communications, looking for opportunities to help. When we saw the request, we didn't wait. We sent 3 ships with rescue equipment and medical teams. They worked alongside local volunteers for 6 days, pulling survivors from the rubble. "How many did you save?" 2,412. Chen smiled at the memory. When the Assembly's review committee finally approved the rescue mission, 3 months later, the crisis was long over. The colony sent a message thanking the Assembly for their concern, without mentioning that humans had already done the work. Vithris felt a strange mix of admiration and unease. What humanity had built was impressive, even noble, but it also represented a direct challenge to the Assembly's authority. If species could simply bypass the official structures and solve problems on their own, what was the point of the Assembly at all? "You must understand," she said carefully, "that the Assembly will not accept this islam. You have been operating outside our jurisdiction for 3 centuries. Some members will see this as a threat." "We know." Chen turned to face her. "That's why we're being open with you now. The situation with the Vreth hegemony is coming to a crisis point. Your border colonies don't have time for the assembly to debate response options. If we're going to protect them, we need to coordinate, and that means the assembly needs to know who we are and what we can do. You expect the assembly to simply accept your help, after learning that you've been operating in secret for 300 years. Not in secret, just quietly. Chen walked toward a door at the back of the room. Come, there's one more thing I want to show you. They passed through the door into a large chamber filled with holographic displays. Each display showed a different species, with information scrolling alongside their images. Vithras recognized some of them from assembly records, but many were completely unfamiliar. These are the members of the cooperative, Chen explained. 53 species, spread across every sector of the galaxy. Some of them are former assembly members who left because they were frustrated with the bureaucracy. Others are species that were never invited to join. A few are civilizations that the assembly doesn't even know exist yet. Vethra studied the displays with growing astonishment. The Velith merchants were here, listed as trading partners with extensive commercial relationships. The Droma Collective appeared as resource-sharing allies. Even the Hollow Star Confederacy, one of the assembly's oldest members, who had connections to this network that the assembly knew nothing about. Some of your own members are part of this, she asked, informally. They maintain their assembly membership and follow assembly rules, but when they need something done quickly, they reach out to us. Chen gestured at the displays. The galaxy is more connected than the assembly realizes, Ambassador. Information flows, resources move, problems get solved, and most of it happens without any official structure at all. Vithras tried to imagine how the assembly would react to this revelation. Ambassador Thalos of the Velith merchants had always been a strong supporter of traditional procedures. Learning that his own species had been conducting informal operations with humanity would be a profound shock. Others would feel betrayed or threatened, or both. Why did you build all this? She asked. You could have joined the assembly, worked within the system, gradually changed things from the inside. Why create an entirely separate network? Chen was quiet for a moment, considering her answer. Do you know how many people die every year because the assembly cannot make decisions quickly enough? I do not have those figures. Neither does the assembly. Nobody tracks it. But we do. Chen pointed to a display showing statistics. Last year alone, approximately 47,000 people across the galaxy died from causes that could have been prevented if help had arrived faster. Medical emergencies, natural disasters, conflicts that could have been mediated before they turned violent. 47,000 lives lost because committees needed time to debate. The number hit Vithras like a physical blow. She had never thought about the cost of the assembly's procedures in such concrete terms. We started the cooperative because we could not accept those numbers. Chen continued. Every life matters. Every day matters. If we can save someone by acting quickly, we will. And if that means bypassing official channels, so be it. Vethras looked at the displays again. 53 species, thousands of personnel, hundreds of ongoing operations, all of it built over 3 centuries by a species that had officially never participated in galactic affairs. You said something is coming, she said, the Vreth hegemony. What do you know that the assembly does not? Chan's expression grew serious. The Vreth are massing forces near the Teleth border. Your intelligence suggests they're positioning for a defensive posture. Our sources indicate they're preparing for an offensive. 3 of your border colonies are directly in their planned expansion corridor. How do you know this? We have people everywhere, Ambassador, including places the Assembly's intelligence services cannot reach. Chen pulled up a new display showing military formations and projected movements. The Vreth will move within the next 6 months. When they do, they will hit fast and hard. Your border colonies will fall before the Assembly can even vote on a response. Vithras studied the projections. They were detailed, comprehensive, and terrifying. If Chen was right, millions of lives were at stake. What do you propose? The cooperative has already positioned assets to respond. We have ships, personnel, and resources ready to deploy. But we can't protect Assembly colonies without the Assembly's knowledge. That would cause more problems than it solves. So you need our permission. Chen smiled slightly. We don't need your permission, Ambassador. We could act regardless, as we have for 3 centuries. But this time, we're offering to work together. The cooperative and the Assembly, coordinating openly for the first time in history. It was an extraordinary offer. It was also a profound challenge to everything the Assembly represented. For 300 years, the Galactic Assembly had considered itself the supreme authority in galactic affairs. Now humanity was revealing that an entirely separate power structure had existed alongside it the whole time. I will need to return to the Assembly with this information, Vithras said. They will have many questions. Some will be angry. Some will be afraid. We understand. Take your time. But remember those border colonies, Ambassador. They don't have much time left. Vethras nodded slowly. She had come to Earth expecting to close a minor administrative matter. Instead, she had discovered that the entire galaxy was far more complicated than she had ever imagined. The empty seat in the assembly chamber was not a symbol of human absence. It was a reminder The assembly chamber erupted into chaos. Vatrs stood at the speaking platform waiting for the noise to die down. She had just finished presenting her report on humanity, and the reaction was exactly what she had expected: anger, disbelief, fear. The assembled ambassadors were shouting at each other, at her, at the universe in general. Ambassador Thalos of the Veluth Merchants was on his feet, his normally calm face twisted with fury. This is impossible. You are telling us that humans have been operating throughout the galaxy for 3 centuries, building alliances with our own member species, and nobody noticed. I am telling you what I observed, Vithrist replied calmly. I have submitted all documentation to the assembly archives. The evidence is clear. Evidence of what? Conspiracy, deception. Ambassador Yeneth of the Hollowstar Confederacy rose from her seat, her crystalline voice cutting through the noise. If what you say is true, Ambassador, then humanity has been deliberately undermining the authority of this assembly for 300 years. I do not believe their intent was to undermine anyone. They simply chose to pursue a different approach to galactic cooperation, without consulting us, without seeking approval. Thalos slammed his fist on his desk. They have been making decisions that affect our territories, our citizens, our interests, and they never once thought to ask permission. The Droma speaker raised a massive arm for silence. His voice rumbled through the chamber like distant thunder. Enough. The assembly will maintain order, or the assembly will be cleared. Ambassador Vithrist, please continue with your report. Vithrist took a deep breath. There is more. That humans believe that the Vreth hegemony is preparing for a major offensive. 3 of our border colonies are directly in their path. The cooperative has offered to coordinate with us in their defense. Coordinate. Yeneth's voice dripped with disbelief. They bypass our authority for 3 centuries, and now they want to coordinate. They are offering to help protect assembly colonies. Whatever their past actions, we cannot ignore the immediate threat. The chamber fell into troubled silence. The Vreth threat was real, and everyone knew it. For years, the assembly had debated how to respond to Vreth aggression. Proposals had been submitted, committees had been formed, reports had been written, but no action had been taken. And now humanity was offering what the assembly had failed to provide: a concrete plan and the resources to execute it. Ambassador Thalos sat down heavily, his anger giving way to something more complicated. What exactly are they proposing? Joint operations. Human ships would deploy alongside assembly forces to defend the threatened colonies. The cooperative has been positioning assets in the region for months. They are ready to act immediately. Immediately. Yeneth shook her head. While we have been debating options for years, they have been preparing to act without us. Yes, that is exactly what they have been doing. The truth of it hung in the air, uncomfortable and undeniable. Humanity had not waited for the assembly to make decisions. They had seen the threat and prepared accordingly. Now they were offering to share their preparations with the very institution they had bypassed. We cannot accept this. Ambassador Krethos of the Outer Colonies spoke up. His species was small and cautious, having joined the assembly only 3 generations ago. If we work with these humans, we are validating everything they have done. We are admitting that their approach was correct and ours was wrong. And if we refuse their help, Vithrist asked, what happens to the border colonies when the Vreth attack? Nobody answered. Everybody knew. The debate continued for hours. Arguments went in circles. Some ambassadors demanded that humanity be condemned for their unauthorized activities. Others insisted that the immediate threat took priority over political concerns. A few quietly suggested that perhaps the cooperative's approach had merit, that perhaps the assembly could learn from their example. Night fell outside the chamber. The artificial sun dimmed, replaced by the soft glow of starlight through the transparent dome above. Still, the debate went on. Vithrist sat in her seat, exhausted but unwilling to leave. She had delivered her message. The decision was now in the hands of the assembly. As the hours passed, she found herself thinking about Director Chen and the facility in the mountains. She thought about Dr. Sarah Okonkwo and her vision of direct action. She thought about the 47,000 people who died every year because help arrived. Too late, she thought about the empty seat. Finally, as dawn approached, the Droma speaker called for order. The assembly has debated through the night. It is time to make a decision. Ambassador Vithrist, you have recommended accepting humanity's offer of cooperation. Do you stand by this recommendation? Vithrist rose. Her scales were dull with fatigue, but her voice was steady. I do. Whatever concerns we may have about humanity's past actions, the immediate reality is clear. The Vreth are coming. Our border colonies are in danger. We can either face this threat alone, with our forces scattered and our response delayed by procedure, or we can accept help from an organization that is already prepared to act. You are asking us to legitimize 3 centuries of unauthorized activity, Thalos said. I am asking you to save lives. The chamber fell silent again. Ambassador Yeneth rose slowly, her crystal form catching the early morning light. I have served this assembly for 700 years, she said. In that time, I have seen great achievements and terrible failures. I have watched civilizations rise and fall, and I have learned one truth above all others, that institutions exist to serve the people, not the other way around. She paused, looking around the chamber. We created the assembly to bring peace and cooperation to the galaxy. We created procedures and protocols to ensure fairness and order. These are worthy goals. But somewhere along the way, we forgot why we created these structures in the first place. Her voice grew stronger. Humanity did not forget. They saw suffering and they acted. They saw problems and they solved them. They did not wait for permission because people were dying while we debated. You were defending their actions, Thalos demanded. I am acknowledging the reality that their actions have saved countless lives, that their network has brought help to people we never even knew needed it, that while we sat in this chamber arguing about procedures, they were out in the galaxy making a difference. She turned to face the speaking platform. I support Ambassador Vethrus's recommendation. We should accept humanity's offer, and we should begin a serious examination of whether our own procedures have become barriers to the very goals we claim to pursue. The vote was called. It was close, closer than Vethrus had expected. But in the end, the motion passed. The assembly would coordinate with the cooperative to defend the border colonies. The message was sent to Earth that same morning. Director Chen responded within the hour. Cooperative forces were already in position. They had been waiting, ready to act, for months. Now, with the assembly's blessing, they could begin moving openly. The ships launched from hidden stations across the galaxy. Human vessels traveled alongside craft from dozens of other species, all members of the cooperative that the assembly had never known existed. They converged on the border colonies, forming defensive positions around the vulnerable worlds. The Vreth noticed. Their intelligence reported the sudden influx of forces into what they had expected to be easy targets. Their military commanders requested clarification from their civilian leadership. For days, nothing happened. The Vreth fleet held position, watching. The combined cooperative and assembly forces waited, ready but not aggressive. Then the Vreth ambassador requested a meeting. The negotiations took place on a neutral station with representatives from the Vreth, the assembly, and the cooperative all present. Director Chen represented humanity. Seated across from the Vreth Supreme Commander, Vethrus attended as an observer. Watching from the gallery above the negotiation table, she saw the Vreth commander's confusion as he tried to understand what he was facing. This was not the slow, divided assembly he had expected. This was something unified, prepared, and formidable. The Vreth had planned their expansion based on the assumption that the assembly would take months to respond. They had not anticipated facing an organized defense within days. Their military advantage had evaporated overnight. By the end of the week, a preliminary agreement was reached. The Vreth would withdraw from the border region. Future disputes would be resolved through negotiation. An ongoing dialogue would be established to address the underlying tensions. The crisis was over before it had truly begun. Vethrus returned to the assembly chamber as the session resumed. The empty seat was still there, still marked with Earth's hologram, but now everyone understood what it represented. Humanity had never needed that seat. They had never needed the assembly's permission or approval. They had simply gone out into the galaxy and done what they believed was right, and in doing so, they had built something that might just be better than what the assembly had created in millennia of careful deliberation. The question now was what the assembly would do with this knowledge. Would they cling to their old procedures, defending tradition for its own sake, or would they learn from humanity's example and find a better way? Vethrus did not know the answer, but for the first time in a very long time, she felt hope. 6 months had passed since the Vreth crisis. Ambassador Vethrus stood in the observation gallery overlooking the assembly chamber, watching as the delegates took their seats for another session. The room looked different now, though the changes were subtle. More species attended as observers, more proposals were being discussed, more decisions were actually being made. The empty seat was gone. It had been removed 3 months ago, following a vote that surprised everyone with its nary. Ambassador Yeneth had proposed the motion, arguing that the seat served no purpose and sent the wrong message. Humanity did not need a designated place in the assembly. They had made their own place long ago. Some had objected, claiming that removing the seat was an insult to humanity. Others worried that it signaled surrender, an admission that the assembly's traditional approach had failed. But, in the end, the majority agreed with Yeneth's reasoning. The seat was not rejection. It was recognition. Humanity had shown the galaxy that legitimacy did not come from institutions. It came from action.ve. THR is still communicated regularly with Director Chen. Their conversations had evolved from formal diplomatic exchanges to something closer to friendship. Chen often shared stories from cooperative operations, small victories and quiet heroisms that would never make it into any official record. Last week, she had mentioned a medical crisis on a remote colony. A new disease was spreading, one that local facilities could not treat. The colony had sent a request to the assembly, but the process would take months. Meanwhile, the cooperative had already dispatched a medical team. They would arrive within days. This was how the galaxy worked. Now, 2 parallel systems, operating side by side. The assembly for the slow, careful work of building consensus among hundreds of species, the cooperative for the urgent, immediate work of saving lives. Some assembly members had grumbled about this arrangement. They saw the cooperative as a rival, a threat to their authority. but most had come to accept the new reality. The galaxy was simply too large, too complex, for any single institution to manage effectively. A soft chime announced that the session was about to begin. Vithras made her way to her seat, passing through corridors that had grown familiar over her 1,000 years of service. Today's agenda included several routine matters, trade agreements, resource allocations, diplomatic protocols. But there was one item that had drawn unusual attention: a proposal to formally acknowledge the cooperative as a legitimate partner organization. The proposal had been controversial when first submitted. Many ambassadors worried that it would undermine the Assembly's authority. Others argued that ignoring the cooperative's existence was simply absurd at this point. Everyone knew about them. Everyone had seen what they could accomplish. The drama speaker called the session to order, and the routine business proceeded without incident. Then, as the morning stretched toward afternoon, the formal recognition proposal came up for discussion. Ambassador Thalos rose to speak first. His attitude had changed significantly since the Vreth crisis. He had visited Earth himself, spending weeks studying the cooperative's operations. What he had seen had transformed his perspective. Honored colleagues, he began, I was once among the strongest critics of humanity's approach to galactic affairs. I believed that their refusal to join the Assembly was an insult to everything we had built. I was wrong. A murmur ran through the chamber. Thalos was not known for admitting mistakes. The cooperative has achieved in 3 centuries what the Assembly has struggled to accomplish in millennia. They have built trust among dozens of species. They have responded to crises with speed and efficiency we cannot match. They have saved countless lives that would have been lost while we debated procedures. He paused, looking around the chamber. I do not say this to diminish what the Assembly has accomplished. Our work is important. Building consensus among hundreds of species is difficult and necessary. But we must acknowledge that our approach has limitations, and we must be willing to learn from those who have found different solutions. Yenneith rose to add her voice. The question before us is simple. Do we recognize reality, or do we pretend that we are the only legitimate authority in the galaxy? The cooperative exists. It is not going away. We can either work with them openly, or we can continue to ignore them while they do the work we cannot do ourselves. The debate continued, but the outcome was never really in doubt. The vote passed with a comfortable majority. The cooperative would be formally recognized as a partner organization, with established channels for coordination and communication. When the session ended, Vethris remained in her seat for a long moment. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the empty seat, the journey to Earth, the revelations about humanity's secret network, the Vreth crisis, and now this. The galaxy was changing, slowly, perhaps, but changing nonetheless. Her terminal chimed with an incoming message. It was from Director Chen. Congratulations on the vote. I hear it wasn't even close. Vithras smiled and typed a response. The Assembly can be surprisingly reasonable when the evidence is overwhelming. Speaking of which, I have some news you might find interesting. The Korathi mining guilds have requested cooperative assistance with a labor dispute in the Outer Reach. Apparently, they were impressed with how we handled the Vreth negotiations and wanted to try a similar approach. Vithras raised her eyebrows. The Korathi guilds were notoriously stubborn, resistant to any outside interference in their affairs. If they were reaching out to the cooperative voluntarily, it was a significant shift. They asked for our help, Chen continued. We're happy to provide it, of course. But I thought you might want to know. Your people are starting to trust us. Trust, that was what this had always been about. Not power or authority or official recognition. Just trust. Built slowly over 3 centuries through countless small acts of kindness and competence, humanity had earned their place in the galaxy. Not by claiming a seat in the Assembly, but by showing up when they were needed and doing the work that needed to be done. Vithras looked at the space where the empty seat had once been. A young aide was now sitting there, taking notes on the day's proceedings. The seat had been reassigned to administrative staff. Since it was no longer reserved for anyone in particular, it seemed appropriate somehow. Humanity had never needed a special place. They had just needed the freedom to act. A century from now, historians would look back on this period as a turning point. The old ways of doing things would not disappear entirely, but they would be supplemented by new approaches, new partnerships, new ways of solving problems. The cooperative would continue to grow, eventually surpassing the Assembly in scope and influence. Some species would worry about this shift in power. Others would embrace it. But all of that was in the future. For now, Vithras was content to sit in the Assembly chamber, watching the stars through the transparent dome above, thinking about how much had changed since she first noticed the empty seat. Permission had never been the point. Action was the point. Results were the point. Humanity had understood this from the beginning, even when the Assembly had not. The empty seat had been their way of saying, we are here, we are working, and we do not need your approval to make a difference. The galaxy had finally understood the message. Director Chen sent one more message as Vithras was leaving the chamber. The same time next week for our regular call. Vithras typed her response as she walked through the corridors. I will be there. And Director, thank you for everything. Thank us by keeping the Assembly moving in the right direction. That's all we've ever wanted. Vithra smiled. It was a good goal, and for the first time in her long career, she believed it might actually be achievable. The empty seat was gone, but its legacy would endure for generations to come.